ChatGPT said desire is one of the most fascinating mysteries of human psychology. It's what drives us to connect, to chase, to fantasize, yet we rarely stop to ask why something or someone turns us on. In this documentary, we'll dive beneath the surface of pleasure and uncover what truly shapes our attraction, from the hidden wiring of our brains to the powerful stories our culture tells us about sex. Justin Lehmiller, and together we'll explore how biology, psychology, and experience intertwine to create the unique spark we call desire. One of the most fascinating things about desire is how personal it is, yet at the same time, how universal. We all feel it, we all chase it, and yet what turns one person on might completely puzzle another. It's easy to think of desire as something purely physical, like an instinct that just happens, but the truth is, desire is deeply psychological. It's a language the body and brain speak together, a dialogue that reflects who we are, what we've experienced, and even what we secretly long for but can't always admit. When I talk to people about their sexual desires, one thing becomes clear very quickly. Most of us assume our turn ons are random. We think, I don't know why I like this, I just do. But in reality, desire is never random. Every preference, every fantasy, every spark of excitement is rooted in something meaningful. Sometimes it's a memory that shaped how we think about connection. Sometimes it's tied to power, vulnerability, or even fear. The mind finds fascinating ways to turn emotion into arousal. It's like the brain's version of poetry. Research in sexual psychology has shown that our desires often mirror our inner world. For example, studies reveal that people who crave dominance or submission in bed aren't necessarily acting out aggression or weakness. They're exploring psychological balance. For someone constantly in control in their daily life, submission can become a release, a way of letting go of pressure. For another person who feels invisible or powerless, taking charge sexually can be a way of reclaiming strength. The body becomes a stage where the unconscious plays out what words can express. And this is where it gets even more intriguing. Our turn ons often form long before we ever experience sex. The brain begins to link pleasure and meaning in subtle ways through moments of curiosity, embarrassment, or even tension. Imagine a teenager who feels drawn to a certain type of voice, a smell, or even a scenario they don't fully understand. The brain takes that moment of heightened emotion and quietly files it under arousing.
Mm.
Years later, that same cue might appear in a fantasy, and they might wonder why it feels so charged. The truth is, our desires are autobiographical. They tell the story of how we've learned to connect, to feel seen, and to express ourselves. What's fascinating is that the brain doesn't just respond to what's visually sexy, it responds to what feels psychologically significant. Take, for example, studies using FRI scans that show how the reward centers of the brain light up, not just in response to nudity or sexual acts, but to emotional intimacy, novelty, or power dynamics. Desire isn't just about the body, it's about meaning. A lingering look, a whisper, a moment of emotional tension, these can be far more powerful than what we traditionally think of as erotic. In my research, I've heard countless people describe desires they thought were strange or shameful, only to discover that they're actually quite common. A person might fantasize about something that seems taboo, but often that fantasy isn't about the act itself. It's about the feeling behind it. Maybe it's the thrill of being wanted without hesitation, or the relief of being fully accepted. Our fantasies are metaphors. They speak the language of emotion, using sex as the medium. Let me give you a surprising example. In one large study, a significant number of people reported fantasies involving risk, being caught, being watched, or breaking a rule. On the surface, that might sound like rebellion. But psychologically, it's often about freedom, the freedom to be completely authentic in a world that constantly tells us to restrain ourselves. When we imagine being caught, what we're really craving is to be seen fully without judgment. That's not just arousal, that's the psyche reaching for connection through the body. Desire at its core is communication. It's how the body speaks what the mind can't say out loud. Every touch, every craving, every moment of excitement is an expression of identity. It's no wonder that when we suppress our desires, it can feel like we're silencing part of who we are. Yet society often teaches us to view desire through a lens of shame or control, to think of it as something dangerous. The problem is, when we bury desire, it doesn't disappear, it just goes underground, surfacing in dreams, fantasies, or unexpected moments. This is why understanding our desires isn't about judging them, it's about listening to them. When we ask why something turns us on, we're really asking what part of me is trying to speak. Maybe it's the part that wants to feel powerful. Maybe it's the part that wants to feel adored. Maybe it's the part that never got permission to express itself before. Once we begin to decode that, desire becomes less of a mystery and more of a mirror. Take, for example, the way we're drawn to people who challenge us or seem emotionally unavailable. It's easy to dismiss that as a bad habit, but psychologically, it can be a reenactment of early emotional experiences, our minds trying to rewrite an unfinished story. The body doesn't distinguish between emotional and sexual tension. It processes both through the same neurochemical pathways involving dopamine, norepinephrine, and oxytocin. So when someone feels the rush of attraction to someone they can't have, that excitement isn't purely lust, it's also the brain's way of seeking resolution. That's why desire can be confusing. It's not always about what feels good, sometimes it's about what feels important. The things that turn us on often point to deeper emotional patterns, our attachments, our fears, our unspoken needs. It's why some people find emotional intimacy more arousing than physical touch, and why others need novelty and mystery to keep the flame alive. The brain thrives on both safety and surprise, and desire exists in that tension between the two. From a biological standpoint, our brains are wired to crave variety. The dopamine system loves novelty, it rewards us for exploring new experiences. That's why in long term relationships, desire can fade if everything becomes predictable. But it's not hopeless. Studies show that couples who continue to explore together, whether through travel, play, or new experiences, can rekindle that spark. The brain doesn't need new partners to feel desire, it just needs new stimuli. Desire isn't about who you're with, it's about how alive you feel with them. Now, there's another side to this cultural influence. What we find desirable isn't just a product of biology, it's also shaped by the stories we grow up with. Media, art, religion, and even the rules we're told as children, all these shape our erotic imagination. Think about how beauty standards change across time and place. What's considered sexy in one culture might be completely different in another. Yet, underneath all that, the same psychological patterns remain. Desire is our mind's creative way of translating culture, experience, and biology into something uniquely personal. Even our sense of smell, sound, or texture can play a powerful role. The olfactory system, which processes scent, connects directly to the brain's limbic system, the part responsible for memory and emotion. That's why a certain perfume or the faint scent of someone's skin can instantly evoke arousal or comfort. Our bodies remember what our minds forget. The texture of touch, the rhythm of breath, the warmth of skin, these sensory cues tie directly into emotional memory. Desire is embodied memory, it's the body remembering connection. One of my favorite things about studying sexual psychology is realizing just how creative the human mind is when it comes to arousal. Even fantasies that seem dark or strange often have roots in healing. A person who fantasizes about being desired intensely might be seeking to undo years of invisibility. Someone who dreams of surrender might be craving a break from constant responsibility. The fantasy becomes a form of emotional balancing, pleasure as therapy. What's equally fascinating is how flexible desire can be. Unlike most instincts, desire adapts. It evolves with our emotions, relationships, and even our sense of self. Someone who once craved passion might later find comfort or emotional safety more arousing. The psychological component is fluid, it grows as we grow. That's why understanding your desire is really about understanding yourself. It's not static, it's a living reflection of who you are in this moment. At the same time, desire can also reveal our contradictions. We might crave both closeness and distance, safety and danger, dominance and surrender. That duality isn't confusion, it's human. The brain is wired for paradox. Desire thrives in the tension between wanting to lose control and wanting to feel safe, between knowing and not knowing what comes next. That's what keeps it exciting, and that's why trying to fully explain desire is like trying to explain a dream. It's made of emotion, memory, and imagination intertwined. But here's the most beautiful part. When we stop treating desire as something to be controlled and start seeing it as something to be understood, it becomes a guide. It shows us what we need more of in our lives: connection, play, freedom, validation. It's not always about sex itself, it's about the emotional truth that sex symbolizes. When someone says they want passion, what they often mean is, I want to feel alive again. When they say they want intimacy, they mean I want to be seen. So if we return to the idea that desire is a psychological language, then every fantasy, every attraction, every spark is a word in that language. Some of those words are easy to understand, others take time to translate. But once we start listening, desire stops being confusing. It becomes enlightening. It teaches us about our own emotional landscape. In my work, I've seen people transform once they stop judging their desires. When they realize that what turns them on isn't a flaw or a mystery, but a message, something shifts. Shame gives way to curiosity. And with curiosity comes understanding, and with understanding comes freedom, the freedom to connect more honestly, both with themselves and with others. Desire, after all, is not the opposite of love. It's one of its most honest expressions. It's the part of us that refuses to be numb. It reminds us that we're emotional, sensual beings capable of both vulnerability and passion. And when we truly understand what turns us on, we also begin to understand what makes us feel alive. That's the real psychology of desire. It's not about the act itself, it's about the meaning behind it, the emotional truth underneath the surface. It's not just about sex, about self awareness, because when you really think about it, desire is just the body's way of saying, this matters. When we talk about desire, we often describe it as if it just happens like a spark that flickers out of nowhere. But what if I told you that what turns us on is rarely random? That the things that make your pulse race, the images or sensations that live in your mind, are your brain's way of translating something much deeper, emotional needs, psychological patterns, and even survival instincts into physical attraction. That's the real psychology of desire. It's not just about the body, it's the mind's coded language whispered through arousal, trying to tell us what we long for most. When I study human sexuality, I'm not just looking for what people do. I'm trying to understand why, because behind every desire is a motive, a need that the body and mind are trying to satisfy in the only way they know how. And here's the fascinating part: our sexual turn ons often mirror our emotional blueprints. They're not random fireworks. They're messages. When you peel back the layers of what excites you, you often find needs like security, validation, novelty, or power woven through the experience. Think about this for a moment. Have you ever been attracted to someone you couldn't quite explain, someone who didn't match your type, but something about them just drew you in? That's your brain responding to something deeper than appearance. Neuroscience shows that desire is driven by the limbic system, the emotional brain, not the rational one. When we feel drawn to someone, our brains are responding to cues: a tone of voice, a facial expression, a way of carrying themselves that align with our internal map of emotional needs. For example, some people are irresistibly drawn to confidence. It's not just because confidence looks sexy, it's because confidence signals safety and certainty. On a psychological level, it tells the brain, this person knows what they're doing, I can relax. For others, vulnerability is what sparks attraction. The softness in someone's eyes, the subtle openness that says, I'll let you in. Those cues trigger our attachment instincts, the part of us that seeks closeness, comfort, and trust. It's amazing how often people confuse desire with taste, as if we simply have preferences. But what we prefer sexually often reflects what our nervous system craves emotionally. A person who grew up in chaos might find calmness deeply erotic because it represents stability. Felt controlled might crave the thrill of rebellion or power exchange because it symbolizes freedom. What turns us on isn't just about pleasure, it's about balance, the psyche trying to heal or harmonize itself through physical experience. In fact, the more we study sexual arousal, the clearer it becomes that it's a sophisticated emotional system. When we become aroused, the brain releases dopamine, the neurotransmitter of anticipation and reward. But dopamine isn't just about pleasure, it's about wanting. It's the same chemical that drives curiosity, motivation, and adventure. That's why desire feels like hunger. It's your brain seeking stimulation, novelty, and meaning all at once. Here's something most people don't realize: arousal and anxiety activate overlapping neural pathways. The same physiological excitement you feel before a big performance, quickened heartbeat, flushed skin, butterflies in your stomach, can also appear during sexual excitement. It's why danger, mystery, or even a hint of tension can feel intoxicating. The brain can mistake fear for attraction because both create that surge of adrenaline. That's why forbidden relationships, high stakes encounters, or secret crushes can feel so electric, not because they're healthier, but because they hijack the same emotional circuits that evolved to keep us alert and alive. When you look closely at people's fantasies, they reveal just how emotionally intelligent the erotic mind really is. Studies show that the most common sexual fantasies often involve themes like power, surrender, or being desired completely. But underneath those images, what people crave isn't the literal act, it's the emotional state that act represents. Power fantasies, for example, aren't about domination, they're about control, safety, and certainty. Submission fantasies aren't about weakness, they're about trust and release. Every erotic image hides a psychological truth. There's a reason we can't always predict what excites us until it happens. The brain associates arousal with meaning, not logic. In one study, people who felt nervous before an experiment, like walking across a suspension bridge, were more likely to find an attractive stranger appealing right afterward. Why? Because their brains misinterpreted adrenaline as attraction. That's the brilliance and the chaos of human desire. It blends emotion, context, and imagination into something that feels immediate and primal, but is deeply psychological. Even our earliest experiences of comfort and connection influence how we experience desire later in life. The attachment theory of sexuality suggests that our adult attractions are shaped by how we first learned to love or to be loved. If you grew up feeling safe and nurtured, you might associate closeness with calm. If affection felt unpredictable or conditional, you might associate passion with anxiety or distance. The body remembers these patterns and they show up later as the rhythm of our desire. Fascinates me most about all this is how desire can evolve as we do. When we grow emotionally, our turn ons often shift to. Someone who once found danger thrilling might later crave emotional depth. Someone who sought validation might begin craving equality. The brain is constantly updating its definition of what feels rewarding, and our sexual desires follow that map. That's why people can experience new turn ons or fantasies later in life, or feel attraction toward things they never expected. It's not random, it's emotional evolution. Cultural context plays a huge role as well. Every society shapes the lens through which we view desire. Media, religion, and gender roles all teach us what's acceptable and what's not, subtly rewriting our erotic imagination. Yet, no matter the culture, people still find ways to express the same core themes: longing for connection, novelty, validation, or freedom. Even when repressed, these needs find expression through dreams, fantasies, or subtle behaviors. The erotic mind is creative. It finds ways to speak even when silenced. Now, here's where it gets even more intimate. Desire doesn't always align with love. We can love deeply without desire and desire intensely without love. That's because they serve different functions in the brain. Love is about attachment and stability. It's oxytocin and serotonin. Desire, on the other hand, thrives on dopamine and novelty. It's restless, curious, and unpredictable. When both overlap, that's when relationships feel electric. That mix of comfort and excitement, safety and danger, known and unknown. Maintaining both requires understanding that desire needs space to breathe. In long term relationships, many couples struggle when desire fades. They assume it means something's wrong with them or their partner. But often it's just biology doing its job. The novelty that once triggered dopamine has worn off. The brain now prioritizes attachment chemicals, oxytocin and vasopressin, to sustain the bond. The good news is we can reignite desire by reintroducing curiosity and unpredictability. Trying something new, even outside the bedroom, can reawaken those dormant reward pathways. The erotic thrives on surprise. The familiar rarely excites it. Think about it. Desire flourishes in the gap between where we are and where we want to be. It's that sense of reaching, of yearning, that gives it energy. If everything is known, desire has nowhere to go. That's why mystery is so seductive. It keeps the mind engaged. A lingering glance, a slight delay, a secret only half revealed. These ignite imagination, and imagination is the engine of arousal. The brain doesn't need full exposure to feel pleasure, it needs anticipation. And that's something we often overlook. That arousal begins in the mind long before it reaches the body. The largest sex organ isn't between your legs, it's between your ears. What we think, imagine, and interpret determines how we feel. If you've ever been lost in a fantasy and felt your body respond as if it were real, you've experienced this firsthand. The brain doesn't fully distinguish between imagined and real stimulation. It reacts emotionally to both. That's why fantasy is such a powerful tool for understanding ourselves. Every fantasy is like a mirror reflecting emotional truths. A person who fantasizes about being desired by many might not crave promiscuity, but rather reassurance that they're wanted. Someone who dreams of seduction might be seeking a sense of confidence or control they lack in daily life. Our fantasies don't always reveal what we want to do, they reveal what we want to feel. That's what makes the psychology of desire so endlessly fascinating. It's not just about behavior, it's about emotion in disguise. Even the body's physiological responses are tuned to emotional meaning. When you're touched by someone you trust, oxytocin floods your system, lowering stress and increasing pleasure. But if you feel uncertain or unsafe, the same touch can create tension instead. The body is constantly reading emotional context. It's why attraction can vanish after a betrayal. Not because beauty fades, because safety does. The mind and body are inseparable in desire. They speak the same language, just through different dialects. What we find attractive also shifts with our state of mind. When people are stressed, they often gravitate toward partners who feel familiar or nurturing. Psychological safety becomes the priority. But in times of excitement or confidence, novelty and risk suddenly become appealing. Our erotic brain is sensitive to emotion. It calibrates attraction based on what we need most in that moment. It's adaptive, fluid, and sometimes contradictory. One of the most remarkable things I've seen in my research is how understanding desire can heal shame. So many people believe their turn-ons make them weird or broken, when in fact, they're just expressing emotional needs through erotic symbols. When someone realizes their fantasy about control is really about feeling safe, or that their craving for attention is about feeling seen, a weight lifts. They begin to see that desire isn't something to hide, it's something to listen to. Because at the end of the day, desire is honest. It doesn't care about rules or approval. It reflects what your deeper self wants, sometimes comfort, sometimes excitement, sometimes recognition. When you strip away the guilt, what remains is raw truth, a map of who you are and what you need. Understanding that map doesn't just make sex better, it makes life richer. We often say desire is fleeting, but I think that's because we rarely nurture it properly. It thrives on curiosity, not certainty. It grows when we explore, not when we assume we already know. To keep desire alive within a relationship or within ourselves, we have to stay curious about our own evolution. What excites us today might not excite us tomorrow, and that's not a flaw, it's growth. Desire moves with us, adapts to our stories, and reveals where we are emotionally in any given moment. So, what really turns us on, it's not just the physical or the visual, it's the emotional resonance. The way someone or something makes us feel recognized, safe, powerful, or free. The brain translates those feelings into arousal because that's the language it knows best. Desire in its purest form is the body's poetry, the mind turning need into sensation. And when we start listening to that poetry without judgment, without fear, we begin to understand something profound. Desire isn't chaos, it's communication. It's your brain's way of saying, this is what I need to feel alive. And maybe that's the most human truth of all.